Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back for another beginner's tutorial for 3ds Max. Today we're going to be modeling this tire. The main point is to get into the practice of creating the repeating pattern and something that I call chop modeling. So last time when we built the house, it was box modeling, right? We started off with a box and then added edges and started pulling those around. So we're going to start this one off by doing a little bit of poly modeling, which is just grabbing an edge and extruding that out. And then we're going to create this tire. So if we come on over into 3ds Max, hey folks, so you'll see here the tire that I've made. And if we come into perspective mode, okay, not quite sure why that happened, but okay. Oh, probably because I was, yes, okay. So here we are. So here's the tire that we're going to be making. I added a couple of lights just to make things a little fancy and look nice on the render. So this is pretty much what we're going to be doing today. So you see a nice little repeating pattern that goes all the way around. There's, no seams there. And if I don't go too long, then I'll show you in this how to create this rim as well. And I just put it on a cute little stand here just to, oop, that got totally messed up in the Turbo Smooth, but that's okay. So, to get started, let's just go ahead and reset this scene. So I'm going to go up into my layers and let's just hide all that stuff. And we're going to set this over to default lights, shaded mode, orthographic. And this time you'll notice I've got an extra little yellow border around the screen here. So you just get rid of that with Shift F. I had that on, it's called Safe Frames, and basically that's when it comes time to render, you'll be able to see exactly what your camera sees in the borders, and there are different settings that you can put into that. So, for instance, if you're putting text inside, then there's a text safe, which is basically you don't want to have text too far out to the edges because then people tend not to see it or not to look at it. So, yeah, there's different modes of that. But we're just going to unhide my reference planes. If you're not sure how to do these reference planes, then please take a look at my previous video, the how to build a house. So at the beginning of part one of that, it's a two-parter. At the beginning of part one, I showed how to set up um, your reference images. So I just basically went on the internet. It's quite easy to find a tire tread pattern. I found this one. Um, very easily, and you can easily find whatever pattern you want. I chose something that's very simple. I suggest going with something very simple, probably not these with the jaggy, weird things on these curves. This isn't too bad, right? It's still just straight lines for the most part, a little bit of a curvature. Um, any of these will do just fine for a beginner. Try not to go into anything that's too crazy or too small of a design when you're just getting started. The other thing that I'm going to be doing, you see here, it's quite flat along the top. Um, which I'm actually going to avoid. When things are very flat or if things have very, very sharp edges, they tend to look very artificial when it comes to render time or in games or whatever. So you'll want to add a little bit of variation, just like the corner of a building. If you just have two planes coming straight to a corner, you really feel that sharp edge of a corner. So you might want to bevel the edge a little bit. And in this case, that's a properly inflated tire. If we look at some inflation images here, you see that a proper inflation really does make it almost a flat line along the top and bottom and it bulges out. If it's overinflated, then it's going to bulge out towards the middle because of the excess pressure. And if you own a car, then you'll notice that that's going to wear out the center of your tire a little faster. What we're going to aim for is actually a little bit underinflated, where it sags down in the middle, and that gives an interesting visual dynamic, right? So we're not going to go quite this far, but we are going to go basically in that direction of curving this top surface a little bit, and then we've got the tread itself. So if we look at this tread for a minute, you'll see that as most treads, not most treads, all treads are repeating patterns, right? It's a few pieces that are then repeated over and over and over, and it's basically just a roll press that rolls down into the rubber. So if we look at this, it's really rows from this big S shape to this big S shape with these couple of shapes in the middle. And this piece is the same as this piece, just rotated 180 degrees around. And same, these two are these two, and this piece is this piece. So we're going to create just these four pieces, just this big S, this whatever, these three smaller pieces here, and then we're going to replicate that over to the other side, and then we're going to repeat that time and again, and then bend the whole thing around. So let's start off. We're going to start off by creating this outer shell, the rubber wall, if you will, and let's start off. Oh, I'm still on a hidden layer. So we're going to come over here into default, create that plane, and press F4 so we can make sure, and we've got too many edges. So then this, I can come up here to align these two little boxes, one on top of the other is going to be your align tool. So with this selected, I click align and then click what I want to align it to, which is this plane over here. And here is some interesting align tools. So you can, I'm going to do it just from center to center and then readjust it afterwards. But you could go from the current object minimum, center, or maximum until the target object. The target object is my reference wheel well. But we can go to the maximum of that, the minimum of that, or to the pivot point, which should be right at the center. And we'll just put that there and change it to a editable poly so that we can start working with it. So first off, I'm just going to move these 2 points a little bit over so it's not going too far. Bring it back to the front. And let's get this up into position. So these 2 points I'm going to move almost to the center, a little bit past, because if you look at the design, the center line of the design is going to be cutting through, right, if I just do a drag line here, it's going to be cutting through multiple pieces, right? This is roughly the center. So we're actually creating on a diagonal. So I'm just going to start off by moving it just a little bit over because we do want to have straight lines going along the tire because that way when it comes time to bend it around, it's going to be very easy to bend it around because we've got nice straight lines and then the other geometry that comes off of it that's not as critical for it to be in those perfectly straight lines. Obviously, we're not going to be ending up getting a lot of vertical and horizontal lines because of this diagonal pattern. Um, but Alt X and we'll get some transparency here and we'll make it just wide enough. Let's do this one up here actually. So yeah, we need it to be we need to include this piece, and this piece, and not much more. So we can just go minimally past that and just past the bottom of that pattern. And we'll grab these and move it over to about here. Now, I'm not going all the way out to this outer edge because if you look at a lot of tires, I should have a decent example nearby. That's a good example. Just view that. So if you look at this tire, for instance, you'll see that if we pretend that this is that S pattern along the edge, you see that it goes right off the edge of the corner. And if we were to look at this tire in the same type of cross section, it would look as though it's solid here, even though there is an opening on the side that comes off. So we're going to want to keep that in mind that our the cutout piece is going to come right over the edge, and we want it to go over that edge. So we're just going to go to there. I'm going to hold Control, switch to Edge, and you see I've got three edges selected now, right? And you can see that over here, three edges. So it's the two that I had and these two coming off of it because I switched from vertex selection. I'm just going to hold Alt, click and drag to deselect those edges. We'll come back over here and drag that down, down. And I'm actually going to make this a little bit less of a curve because last time I created it, this looked like an incredible bulge and not the way that tires are really made these days. So I'm just going to make it a little bit flatter. And then we can come down maybe to there, there, pull that down. And I'm going to make a little lip, a little inside lip, right? So what we're going to be doing, right, this is a vertical slice of the tire. So we're going to be repeating this a bunch of times horizontally and then bending that whole thing around. And then once it reaches back and touches itself, that's going to make our donut of a tire. We might want to show off the tires not on the rim. And partly for that reason, we want that little bit of a lip underneath. It's also going to help with some shadowing if we're going in a high res. We are going to want to have that inside lip, and it can help out with the turbo smooth that it's not going to do some weird things. Now, next on this top, I'm going to grab these two edges, and we're going to right click and connect. I'm going to connect it 4 times. And like I mentioned earlier, this is where I'm going to give it that little bit of a underinflation. So let's grab vertices and let's look at the tire inflation image. So if we come right back up in here and we can zoom in there, there's no real flat spots. So we kind of want to bring that down, bring these up a little bit, and that's kind of making it a sharp corner, so we'll get rid of that. So that's pretty cool. That's a good place to start. So just to separate things, I'm going to put this on its own layer so that it's not interfering. I like to keep default as my reference planes and then everything else put on different layers. So you see here, I've got like just the rims that I designed, and actually I've made two. So I've got that kind of spirally design that was on the render, and this one, which is kind of more like a truck rim. But we don't need those. And then up here, we've got the actual tire that I made, and then the environment that I had made, which is just two boxes with a couple of textures slapped onto it, as well as the stand that was here. And I put in a bunch of cams and lights, which I also like keeping on a separate layer. That makes it nice and easy to be able to hide things that you don't want to see that are logical groups, right? So you want to keep as organized as possible. So that's that ref. We don't need that, so I'm just going to hide it by clicking on this light bulb. And this, we're going to create its own layer, and we're going to call this tire exercise, just to say it's the exercise version, not the original version that I made. And then we can minimize that. Come back to the top. I'm going to flip this around just so that top is pointing up. I like it to be legible. And we can get started here. So select Alt X, we'll get our transparency back. And we are going to hide this bottom part because we don't need to see it. And it can be a little bit confusing, right? To see all these extra polygons, and from the top you're seeing them through, so you might get confused as to what edge you're actually clicking on. So I select the faces I don't want to see, and I hide selected. The opposite is, of course, also an option. You could hide the ones that you can select the ones that you do want to see and hide unselected, which is the opposite. So one thing that I noticed right away, this edge, and we're going to do an edge constraint, needs to go a little bit lower down because we want that edge to line up basically with the bottom of that pattern. And well, here we'll just add another loop, not to mess with the topology we already have, and bring that to the edge of this pattern, right? This inner lip is going to be coming off from that spot there. Otherwise, we look good, right? We're making these three shapes, and we'll worry about the diagonalness of the pattern afterwards. For right now, we're going to go right ahead and jump right in. So our main tool today is going to be the cut tool. So this is why I call it chop modeling, because basically we're going to be chopping into this design and then pulling out the shapes. And one of the reasons why I do it this way, a lot of people, a lot of 3D modelers will use a plane and then create this shape and this shape and this shape, and then find a way to bridge them together. And I find that that can actually be more difficult in the long run because the number of edges and where things line up can be really weird, and you end up having a harder time deciding. Well, I have a harder time deciding what's going to be bridged to what. So instead, we're just going to chop it out of this and then add edges where we need them to make it quads and triangles, right? We want to have quads as much as possible. Triangles are acceptable in a lot of situations, especially if it's not going to be animating or deforming. But anything more than four, we want to avoid like the plague. So we're going to start off by just creating the shapes and not worrying about the quads so much. And then afterwards, we're going to add in all of those shapes. So let's start off with this S. So I'm going to start off right down here on this edge, and we're going to start cutting. Come right to there. And here, because this edge here of this part of the S and this part of the S are in a perfectly straight line and should be in a perfectly straight line, I'm just going to cut directly from here all the way to the other side of that straight edge. I actually kind of feel, you know what, I'm going to undo, get that where I want it. I was adding an extra edge there that really wasn't necessary. So we're going to keep this a little bit lower. The lower it is, the easier it is to work with, right? You want to start as low poly as possible to get a general shape of what you're going for, and then you can refine afterwards, right? If you need more details, no problem going ahead and adding them afterwards. Oh, one thing that I just did, I came to this point, and I know I'm going to cut next to here, but I didn't want to. But if you cut from there right to there, what oftentimes will happen is you actually put an edge on top of an edge, and there's actually two edges that are created there, which cause a problem, and they don't separate properly, they don't turbo smooth properly. So I just ended the cut there, so it's just one line going around, and I'll just start a new one right here. Now keep in mind, you want to keep this into quads, and we're going to want to have nice smooth lines going up and down along here. So I'm going to match that. If I have a vertex there, I'm going to have another one there. Uh, this vertical line is going to be automatically cut. I've got that one there, so I'm going to put one there. So you see, once that's connected and once that's connected there, we're going to have nice quad shapes. And again, we're just going to keep going. I'm going to start off just by making that a square edge. And we can decide afterwards if we actually want to round that off or if a square edge is what we want. But until then, we just keep on cutting. Keep on cutting. There we go. Next, we're going to want this shape in here. What I could do actually is grab this edge, and I'm going to still constrain to edge and just move that over a little bit so that it lines up with where I want that to cut out, because this isn't defining anything right now except for a little bit of curvature in the middle, which we placed a little bit haphazardly. So there's no problem moving it over a couple of pixels for it to fit and save us from running into a problem. So before I run into some other problem with constraints, I just turned off constraints. It can be a little bit of a pain in the butt when it's on and you're not paying attention, and it can end up doing things that are not expected. And we'll come back up, but we're not going to worry about that triangle there. That's perfectly fine. And that is one shape down. So we'll come over here. Now, I'm going to start off by cutting from here. And again, we've got a nice long straight edge that goes right about to there. Uh, Again, we can move this line. And I'm going to move it over so that it's at this peak, right? This peak right here. Again, to save a couple of vertices, and that one can be lined up. Actually, that's pretty good there, right? Because I get this peak up here, and I get this peak down here, basically, for free. So back to cutting. We cut. And this one also, we've got a nice straight line of edges, so we're going to cut all the way up. And we can actually cut to there and then to there. Again, with the cutting tool, make sure you've got the right shape, right? Here, I'm cutting into a face, so it's a square. Here, I'm cutting into an edge, so it's a horizontal line. And here, I'm cutting directly onto a vertex, so it's a small dot box there. So make sure you've got the edge or vertex selection that's appropriate for the spot that you're cutting into. And it's not the end of the world if it's not if you don't make that click perfectly the first time, you can always fix it. There's always welding and stitching and all kinds of wonderful stuff that you can do for that. All right. So not too painful yet, I hope. I hope everybody's having an easy time following along here. Right, so there's our couple of shapes, right? It just took us 5 minutes there to cut those out. Oh, wow, something weird happened here. I forgot a line. So let's make sure that is cut to there. And right click to come out of cutting. This edge, we don't need at all. Back into cutting. So next we're going to want to make sure that we've got all quads. So this is going to take a little bit more work and a little bit more of an eye for what's going on. So sometimes you'll make a cut and it won't want to cut, especially in this type of situation because we have a bunch of shapes that are not quads. 3ds Max likes working with quads and tends to not like working with a lot of other shapes. So if it doesn't work from, like from here, I'm just trying to continue this line along. If it doesn't work from one direction, just try it from the other direction, and that tends to work instead. So again, just going to continue along, creating our quads. And back to here, create the other side of that. Ah, there it happened again. See, it's bound to happen every so often. But in 3D modeling, one good thing is that there is always more than one way of doing something. You can You can always find another way. Somebody has a different technique that they've worked out that they prefer. That's the same reason why all the tools that are, or almost all the tools that are on this ribbon at the top are over here on the right. They're also on your right click menu for the most part. Because some people, like I generally have this at two panes on the right hand side, and you can just click and drag from that edge. And technically, you can get more more space than is useful. And but if you're a shader, texture artist, or if you're, some other functions might need to have a larger pane of tools. So they'll just put that all the way out, or even go into, I believe it's called Pro mode, where almost everything is minimized, right? Like we don't need this timeline on the bottom because we're not doing animation that could be hidden away. But yeah, where I'm just babbling, which I have a tendency of doing. Hope that doesn't bother you. Uh, and we'll just keep going here. Um, yeah, if we cut that, is that a good idea? Because that gives me a quad on the top, a quad on the bottom. Yes, I think that is a good idea. And then that can be cut to there. It gives me another quad, but then I've got this thing here, which can go to there. Right, we've got a whole bunch of quads there. Oh, okay, we've got this to do as well. Or, actually, we can do that. And that would probably be a better idea because when it comes to smoothing, that triangle could do something weird. Um, yeah, we're also going to cut this over, cut that over, because these edges are going down to the rest of the tire. Right? We can't see it right now, but the side wall of the tire is coming down over here. So we're going to want to make sure that those lines are going to continue on down. And we just keep cutting, making our quads. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, okay. And for the most part, I'm also not worrying about what's above this and what's below these shapes, because I'm pretty much going to be getting rid of this part and this part afterwards, because that's where we're going to be bridging, right? We're going to be bridging this section repeated over multiple times, and we're going to want to make that to be as clean as possible. And we'll just pull these over. Actually, I really, really don't need to worry about that. Oh, I forgot an entire side of this shape. And over to there. There we go. So we can cut that right up to there. Cut that. That can go to the corner. So actually, I think I'm just going to do that instead. So just click, click, right click, 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 right click. Quad and that. Oh, see, I missed there. So just a quick undo. Control Z is your friend. And oh, I mentioned in the stream, but not so much here, that if you want to redo, if you went one step too far backwards, you want to come back and redo a step that you undid, you can press Control Y, so that will bring it back for you. bring it back down tonight. And see, this is a floating vertex, right? This isn't defining anything. It's not really helping us out, except that that gave us that vertical line. So I'm kind of thinking that may not be necessary at all. I'm at least going to do a little target weld and get rid of that shape there. And then we can just move that up a little bit to compensate. Keep on cutting. And this might need a little bit more thought, but only just barely. Like I said, if it doesn't work one direction, just cut in the other direction and you should be fine. That's not so good. If I cut from there to there, these oblique angles aren't great, but they're not the end of the world either, because that is still a quad. So we're keeping relatively smart geometry. And so now we're going to need to bridge these shapes from side to side. So more cutting. And hmm, I'm just thinking as I go. Yeah, it's fine. And back to our tool. I will do something about that up there. It's kind of ugly. And of course, two triangles makes a square. Well, a rectangle. There we go. Okay, so now we can, well, yeah, Swift Loop could work just fine there. We'll just scale those flat and back to our cut tool and cut that to there. Okay, so if you have not saved yet, this is an excellent time to get started. If you, and actually is maybe a little bit late, so just Control S is going to save. I am going to save as Tire 2, which is actually, yeah, Tire 2 is the stream exercise that I did. No, let's call it Tire 3, just to not lose it. Tire 3. And that's kind of how you want to work, right? You want to iterate so that if anything bad happens, then you're not going to be caught out in the cold and having lost hours and hours of work. You just lose a little bit of work. So we're going to get rid of a bunch of polys that we don't need because that poly is going to be overlapping these other shapes, which we don't want. We want to have those shapes to be welded all nicely together. So we're just going to get rid of stuff like that. Yeah, that should be fine. Now we want to double check. Now I think I got most things. Oh, yeah, actually I have a five-sided right here, so that's going to be an excellent example. So before you start, if you're doing this kind of chop modeling or changing around topology, doing poly modeling, right? If you're making polys edge by edge, then you might want to check to make sure that you have quads and not a bunch of other shapes. So to do that, with faces selected, so make sure you're not in vertex or edge mode, going to come up here to selection and click on non-quad. That's going to highlight everything that is not a four-sided shape. So you see this one is an egregious problem. This one is probably this vertex here, again, this vertex there. Again, triangles are not a problem, but we want to minimize them as much as possible. There are some shapes that look like they should be quads over there that seem to not be. So we're going to go ahead and check a couple of things. So we want to look over here at vertex and make sure that we've got only a single vertex selected at a time. See this one here. When I select it, it's two vertices. Oh, got hiccups, sorry. So we just weld those together, vertex 133. And now when we go back to non-quad, you see these two disappear. That's triangle, it's fine. So something in here is going wrong, potentially at the intersection here. No. Oh, yeah, right there we've got a problem. Weld that. So just keeping an eye on the right, two vertices selected here. So weld. Oop, no, I meant that. And again, come back here, click non-quad, and you see those disappear. Yes, this is the stupid shape, so we are going to do, let's come back over to modeling, grab our cut again, and we'll cut from there actually all the way up to there, which gives us a nice flow there as well. I am going to move this vertical. The vertical is not critically important for this, so I'm actually going to do a target weld, and we're just going to move that over. We don't need that to be there. Similarly, we're going to weld that over to there, and then we've got two triangles, so we can grab that and take it down. And we actually have fewer polygons now, which is excellent for us. If you can minimize your poly count, then definitely do. You know, you don't want to have more polys than you need because that just makes things heavier, can make things more difficult to UV and to do some other stuff that I might show you in another video. So this one too, it's just a little off vertical, which is fine, and this surface is not being bent terribly. If I find that it is kind of getting in the way, again, I'm just pressing Z to recenter that. If I find that's getting in the way, then I can kind of recut down. That is kind of a big face, but we're not bending it in that direction very much. No, I'm gonna do without. So again, let's come on back to polygon, non-quad. Okay, that one. Three vertices. Wow, I missed all over the place there. Quad, yep, those disappear. And we're going to need to cut these out. I'm just going to right click to select that tool. Another reason why tools are in multiple places, you may want to keep a certain tool available while accessing a different tool. And I think I may have missed that one. No, that's fine. 4966, we're good. Okay. Another one down here. Well, not quite. Okay. We're just going to save again. Control save, and we just did some work. Let's make sure we don't lose that work. Okay, so yes, all the non-quads that we have now are all just triangles. That's fine. And I think we can move on to the next step now. So we are going to unhide the entire shape. So you need to scroll on down here. Whoops, where'd it go? Unhide all. Boom. And we got the side back. Now, in our work, we deleted some edges and added some edges that didn't go all the way down to the bottom. So that's pretty easily fixed. We come on back to modeling. We'll just use our Swift Loop tool, and we need 1, 2 there, 1, 2, 3 there, And then we can grab, oh, actually, we can grab that whole edge. Another good place to use snapping. So you just press S and it turns on this snaps toggle. I'm going to right click on it just to make sure I do have vertex selected and not grid points. By default, I believe it's grid points. So there, when I come close to this vertex, see there's a little yellow cross, and we want to grab that. No, no, what are you doing, silly? We want to grab this. All right, being difficult. There we go. So line that right up with that vertex on the side. And similar with this, we're going to grab that and line that up with that vertex. There we go. So now we've got nice straight shapes going all the way down, although those are not welded, right? They're just moved over. So I'm going to go ahead and weld and weld. And then we can grab, we'll turn snaps off, grab these two vertices, right click connect, and we just do that down the line. And another thing, I think I mentioned it in the stream of this exercise, you can right click and there's these four blue boxes here. They represent each of the categories of tools. So like this top left box is these tools up here. The bottom left box can be those down there, top and bottom right as well. And that's going to redo the same action as you last did within that category. So it's going to remember the cut tool and it's going to remember connect. And I can tell that because they're a little bit whiter, right? You may not be able to tell in the video right here, but they are a little bit brighter white than the other words, which are gray. So if I just select the little box there, you see it did the same thing as I did last time with the same settings. So like right now, my connect is just one edge, but the last time you might have been connecting two parallel edges with three edges cutting perpendicular. And you may want to keep making three cuts. Well, that blue dot is the same as opening up the with options and just selecting to do that again. So with that there, I'm just going to do a little bit of cleanup here because this does a weird off to the side. So we'll just move that over a little bit. And actually these edges, I actually feel I'm getting too many edges there that aren't necessarily helping me. So I think I'm going to minimize some of this. Yeah, so we've got this, the S shape is going to be cutting off and coming out. Wait a minute, I don't think I need this one pretty much at all. Backspace. Yeah, we do. Okay, well, we'll grab these two, connect. And then we're going to grab these two, connect. Sorry, not connect. Weld. And we do weld with settings, drag it up a little bit. And we can do that for the whole rest of the row. I don't know why I only selected two. So just right click, weld, they come together. And same thing over here. Make sure I didn't grab the side edge there, and that I didn't grab too high, and that I'm destroying my S. Yeah. So again, we can just grab into that blue box. And you see clicking on the blue box even opened up with options because with options was the last option that I selected. And those I'm going to leave there. Okay. So now we've got, oops. Oh yeah, if you're ever looking for something, if you don't know what it is, you know what it's called, but you don't know where it's found, or you need to find more information about it, press the X key, like X-ray, and it gives you this search option. So I can do like, what's he talking about when he says extrude? Or, if you want to add that, you can extrude mode, extrude along spline, or extrude along spline settings. extrude edge poly, right? So you can get the tool that you want right there, even if you don't know where it's gonna be. Right, so we've got our shapes, but they have no depth, right? For right now, it's pretty flat. And actually, that is kind of a harsh edge as well. So what is this edge defining? Oh, oh, whoops, that was the bottom edge. Let's just hide selected. Without that. Okay, that's that edge, that's that edge. No, it's this edge that I find problematic. That's the sharp one. What are you doing? Ah, you're defining a little bit of a curve that I didn't curve. Okay, there we go. I was wondering why that was there. Oh, but actually it's still too sharp. So we'll just move it down a little bit. Just a wee little bit. That's cool. And that edge, I think we can move further along. Yeah, so I'm going to turn on my edge constraint and just slide that along and just slide that along. Okay, so from here, now that we have these shapes, we're not going to start duplicating things yet, because if we start duplicating now, then we'll have to pull out all of those replacement shapes. So we're going to pull up the depth out of this and then create the rest, create the repetition. So let's just come around here. Oh, yeah, we got some loops that are leading into weird shapes. And, and I've just recognized that to there is also kind of unnecessary. Right, if I grab that, not those, and hold Control Backspace, I'm not hurting anything by doing that. Right, I didn't create any five-sided shapes, and yeah, that's fine. More polys saved. Though one or two polys on a relatively low poly object is not really a problem. Okay, so we look at this. I believe we have everything here. So we are going to extrude this up. So let's come back to the front. I'm going to unhide all. Now, when you unhide all, it's going to ask, do you want to unhide things from other layers and stuff? So I'm going to say, no, I don't want to unhide the other layers. And we extrude with settings. Going to pull it up to there. Now, even local normal. Now, local normal at first looks kind of right? It's all kind of splaying out. But really, this side edge is meant to be going up, right? It should be coming up off the wall and up, not coming up off the wall and then out to the side, at least in most cases. So that's not the greatest use. So I'm gonna come back to here. So what I'm gonna do instead is, here, we'll grab the border and we are gonna, see, I got my constraints on and it caused me a problem. That didn't see it happening. Yeah, so by pulling out the side edge, which I'm going to be deleting in a moment, I can now grab these, pull them straight up, and then bridge the two together without losing the outer edge. All right, so I pull that straight up onto element so that it is still a part of this original object. And then we basically just select everything that's underneath it. Hide selected. So we can now, and here I'll make this darker blue so it's a little bit easier to see what's going on. Then we just go back through on these shapes, reselect them, make sure you have the exact same shape and not just something similar. Yeah, it's there without that. And this one comes down to there. Is that correct? Turn on transparency. Yeah, see, I'm not seeing any white behind it. So with those selected, I can just delete that. We'll unhide all so that we can see all that. And now we can grab borders, say that outer border with that border. And we're going to bridge with settings just to take a look at it, and everything is fine there, so we accept those two borders and bridge. And now that I know that the first one was bridging correctly, the rest of them should also bridge correctly, and they're not going to have any extra loops through the middle or anything superfluous. Oh, and didn't that work nicely? I didn't expect that piece to work quite so well. So, and now we don't need those anymore. Right, so now we've got our shape. So the treads are coming off nicely. And we're just going to select all. We're going to get rid of smoothing groups. So that way every polygon is, it's faceted, it's called, right? So it's not smooth from one shape to another. Like if I were, like you can tell this is a lighter blue than here. If I grab these two and put them on, see, polygon smoothing groups, if I just click one, you see those two are nice and smooth now. I haven't changed any of the topology. It's exactly the same. I've just told it that smooth those two together. So actually I can go by 45 with, oops, that. And we can add that. Lower this down to, let's say 15 and subtract that. And add these. So basically this is the surface of the tire, right? And that is a surface that we want to be completely smooth together, including these risers. Maybe not that riser though. Right, these two risers, we want it to look as though that's running right from the top of the pattern right down onto the wheel wall. So you see something has group one, which was those two polys down here I selected before. So it's grayed out, but the one is missing. So that means that uh, these polygons have group one, but they also have nothing, right? Because otherwise it would select multiples of them. It would show me that one and three are selected to say that smoothing group one and three are in use by the polys that you have selected. So I'm just going to click in one, and you see the one came back and is blue with the one. So now if I turn that off, you see how this flows more nicely right up into it. And we can do that for some of these other things as well, right? We can make sure that the tops of all these, why are you selecting that? Sometimes that angle selection has to do with the camera angle more than the face angle that you're selecting. So sometimes just move the camera around a little bit and it should work for you again. So I'll put that on smoothing group 2. We'll grab that without these ends, as well as those and those. Oh, yes, by angle does not allow you to loop. Ooh, starting to get a little bit of a dry throat here. I'll try to move this right along. And we're going to clear all, call that group 3. So now you see the top faces are smoothed together, the walls are smoothed together, and the inside is smoothed together. Oh my. Sorry if you heard that gulp. It wasn't my intention. So now we're going to want to have some control loops. And also, of course, we want to have these in before we start adding repetition to this. Now, control loop is basically here. I'm going to create a quick box just to show you very obviously. So if we look at this box, if I'm going to smooth this out and apply a turbo smooth, let's just make this poly, what it's going to do is going to take the average between any two faces, the angle that those exist on, and average them out and create polygons in the middle here that go by that angle. So if here is a straight 90-degree angle, so if I turbo smooth this, you see it's taken the average of that vertical and that vertical and gave each the 23.5 degrees to make up 22.5 degrees to make up 45 degrees, all added together. What? Sorry, no, these are 40. Yeah, whatever. But yeah, so the turbo smooth, but I might want that corner to stay out there and just be a rounded corner. So what I do in that case is use control edges. So if I put an edge there and there, see, now it's only averaging these two faces and not including those two when it comes to that corner, right? Because the average between these two faces is flat, so it's going to try to stay as flat as possible. But the average between these two is still that 90 degree, or the average is 45. So now when I turn on Turbo Smooth, see, now it's only rounding, and you see that same type of topology, right? Those same angles are being used, but it's only on those edges. So I'm going to do the same thing over here, because if I turbo smooth this right away, it turns into mush, right? That's not what we're looking for. Now, some things do balloon out that way, but that's not what we're aiming for. We want something that's relatively sharp and that's in control, right? So actually, by coming back in, I can see I had selected the top edge and bottom edge. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab the others up here, as well as these inside edges. And these bottom edges. Ooh, actually, I am going to need to do one more thing before I do that, which is I'm going to grab the border, hold Control, switch to Edge, so that I can deselect a few things. And I'm going to deselect those edges. And you know what? I can actually deselect these front edges. And then from here, we'll hold Shift and extrude. Yes. I want world from center, go on out. So that's just that little bit. Why are you being silly? Okay, we'll do that even differently. Get rid of those edges and those edges, and we can just drag those over like that. Back to this edge, so just a quick double click gets me that whole loop, which is more than I want, but it got me a lot more than just making single clicks. So that will drag out that way, and then we can grab, oh, no, no, sometimes you gotta do it manually. And we can drag those out. All right, so back to the. Oh, you know what? I'll show you another way to make that selection. So if I'm going to go back to selecting by angle and select the faces of the top of the shape. Without that, with that, without or that, or that. F3 to go into wireframe mode, just to be able to see right through it. There we go. Okay, so we can hold Shift instead of, see, if we hold Control, it's going to select all the edges that are involved in that selection. Instead, I'm going to hold Shift and press Edge, and now I've got the border of the faces that I had selected. Those edges become a selection. So from here, we can do an extrude. So roll on down here. We're going to set the height to 0 and then start pushing up the width. The width was too high, actually, right? The width was already there. So fiddling around up and down didn't seem to do anything. I needed to come way down to get those control edges there. And then we're going to do basically the same thing right along the bottom. Now the bottom outer edge is important. The bottom inner edge is not as critical, especially in these shapes, right? Whether these two faces are rounded or are sharp rounded, right? Just a little bit of a bevel on the edge is not going to make a difference. Out here, however, we're going to be able to see it, so we're going to want to add it in here. And we can do some cleanup on some of those edges as well. Actually, there's definitely some cleanup that's going to be needed to do right there, but that's just a couple of edges or vertices that need to be moved over. Okay, I believe I have what I want again. F3 to go into wireframe mode. And, oh, I missed that one. There, that's better. Nope, but I'm missing that. And I have, nope, I'm missing that too. Yes, we have full S going around, the full border of that, full border of that. Okay. And again, we'll do our extrude with settings, remembers the previous settings to there. So now, actually, well, before we turbo smooth, let's clean this up because this is kind of ugly right now. And we're getting more, we're actually getting five-sided shapes here. Right, if I hadn't connected that together, that would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's not good. And like this one actually wants to be over there. And we can actually just target weld that over. Now, since we do have a little bit of an angle there, we may want to constrain to face. So that way it's not coming up off the face or going down, it's staying along that face. And target weld that over. A couple of movements need to happen here. Right, it being way over here was completely useless and would not have smoothed the way that I wanted it to. Wow, yeah, it got some weird positions. Well, weird positions because I made my topology a certain way. That can happen. Mhm. I think there we're starting to look a little bit better. There's another 5, so we can just weld those together. Oh, whoops, we need to come back to cut. Actually, we can just weld those together, right? You take those two, weld. I'm gonna target weld that over first, and then just select that and weld. And we'll target weld you over. Just target welding and welding. Back and forth. Weld. And weld. Yeah, I decided to split those up, but we're actually going to just bring them back together. And then we can backspace to get rid of that vertex and that edge. I guess those were a little bit farther away from each other. Oop, come on. What else? We just weld all that? Yeah, that's kind of okay. All right. So, like I was saying, we're adding all these edges as control edges. So it's not defining additional geometry, it's helping to define what happens when we turn on Turbo Smooth. Right, so now when we turn on Turbo Smoothing, instead of creating a whole bunch of those ugly balloon animal things, now we're getting a shape where it's coming up and then a rounded corner, and it's a rounded corner coming down to flat. Couple of other things, I kind of feel like this is being destroyed a little bit, right? Because that was a nice straight edge, which is no longer being held as straight. Similarly, these corners which have some weird geometry. Okay. Whoa, that didn't connect correctly in here. You notice it made some weird triangles there. So what I'm going to do is just take you and you, and we connect. And will you work nicely with me? Where do you go? Okay, that's great. So to support this corner, I'm going to put an edge loop there, and that's going to help to define that inner shape as a sharper corner. And if I turn off vertex mode, right? So now instead of blobbing into a round, it's staying a little bit sharper. We can also say this turbo smooth to smooth by smoothing groups, which actually damages that more than anything else. Now, you don't want to use this smooth by smoothing groups or by materials too much. Materials isn't so bad, but smoothing by smoothing groups uh, can be a problematic because if you might think that you've got everything exactly smooth the way that you want it to be, but if you didn't cut up your UVs correctly and if you didn't put any of these control loops and you're then exporting into a game or a rendering program that's not necessarily going to hold on to those smoothing groups or won't understand them in the same way, then it won't smooth, your final product won't smooth the same way as you saw in 3ds Max. So you're better off getting the control loops down rather than hoping for the best at the last point and just hoping that your smoothing groups are going to fix all the problems for you, which they're not. Hey, what happened over here? That's fucked up. Pardon my French, but that ain't correct. Oh, that's that edge that we brought up from there, which we can actually mostly get rid of. So we've got that down. We'll go from the top and we're just gonna deselect that. Whoa, what the hell did that do? Okay, I should have looked at this side of what that Swift loop was doing. Oh man, that totally ruined things here. Okay. Did I do something weird there? How about if we... Although that seems to be holding up that edge relatively well. If I come up here, these corners are actually a little bit sharper thanks to that. So maybe I will leave that edge in, even if it's not entirely necessary. Yep, okay. That's going to stay in place. But only down to there. Grab our vertex, target weld, that to there, that to there, and then we grab by edge, double click that, hold control and backspace. There we go. So getting rid of extra edges that are not at all necessary. Right, we got good stuff. Turn off edge mode, come up to turbo smooth. Yeah, that's actually looking a lot nicer. So turn off turbo smooth again, get back to our edge mode in transparency. So the next thing we're going to want to do is create the mirror image of this to create this half of the pattern on this side. So to do that, we're first going to grab effect pivot only. Um, sorry, I think I mentioned this in the last one, but you may want to rotate this from a different point. And you see the pivot point is where I had originally created the plane, and I started moving edges away from that point instead of moving the whole plane. So that pivot point never moved. So what I'm just going to do is come over here to hierarchy. So our first tab was create, our second is modify, our third is hierarchy. So in hierarchy, I can grab effect pivot only, select my move tool, and move that up to just about the center between these two designs. It's not, it doesn't have to be perfect right now because we're going to need to adjust things anyways. So turn off effect pivot only, go to rotate, hold shift, and rotate the whole thing around. And make sure when I just canceled to make sure that because I didn't look at the angle, I assumed it was correct at 180 degrees, but do make sure down here it is at 180 degrees, or negative 180 comes out to the same thing. And we're going to make that as a copy. No, we're not. We're going to, let's make it an instance. That way it'll be at first exactly the same. And it will allow us to select these edges and move them so that they line up better. Just a little bit. So I'm now going to come underneath this tab. There's, the shotgun to show the end result. And just beside the shotgun, there's make unique. So an instance is an exact copy and duplicating everything that's happening on another object. But we want them to be unique from each other so that we can attach the two together. And actually, I'm going to rename this object as tire. So now we can grab some of these vertices and get them lined up, ready to work. I still have face. on, so we just turn. And I seem to have a, yeah, because these shapes are smaller, right? These two shapes are smaller than this shape. It means I don't have the same number of edges. So I'm going to need to do a little bit of a think about that. I may even get rid of this again and reduplicate it afterwards. Actually, I'm going to do that exactly. So if I take this, how many edges do we have along there? 7. So I think what we can do, I believe what I'm going to do is cut from there out to give us just a couple more edges to work with. Nine, so we can do that to that, that goes to that, that goes to that, those two go together, and that goes together. Okay, that feels better. I'm also just gonna move that in just a smidge, and I'm going to make planar. Now we're gonna instead go local, scale. You're not doing what I want you to do. Not quite sure why that's not working. Normally make planar is good to me. Okay, well, we can do this again. Rotate that around, 180 degrees, instance. Make it transparent just so that we can line these shapes up. That'll do nicely. So we can take this, which is our original object called tire, and make that unique. And we will attach this other piece. We can then grab basically just those two edges and bridge, and then just hold Control and Backspace, and that gets rid of the edges on both sides and keeps them nicely bridged together. And now we've got one diagonal section of the tire, right? We're getting close to home. So let's go ahead and Control S to save that again. You may want to iterate and create a new save file there. So the next thing we want to do is actually, we're going to get rid of one entire edge, not by angle, just that whole loop. Make sure we didn't get anything extra there. And we're going to delete that. You know what? Actually, I kind of liked what was going on there. So I'm just going to move this over a little bit. And again, I'm going to make a copy of, or not a copy, an instance of this. Still as an instance. Make that transparent. Line it up with our design. And this should be straight on the vertical, right? You should not have to do any horizontal or vertical movement. This really needs to start lining up directly on the vertical because that's going to be our around the tire shape. So basically, this outer edge, I'm going to get to line up with that edge. So yes, actually what I was thinking before about selecting those, another problem with uh, instances is that it doesn't want to show you faces. And so put on some transparency and then we can see them again. What? Oh, you're not even going to do that for me. Okay, well, I'm going to make a couple of small assumptions that that is going to be correct. So I just got rid of the bottom edges, but not the top edges. Right, so that way I can use that to fill the gap. Will it let me? Okay, you know what? Let's just make that unique. That's a silly function. Don't know why they have that there. Okay, so first off, these edges are basically gonna be perfectly straight and will line up to a straight edge on the other side. So here, let's go back to world pivot. Bring that right to there. Remember, this other piece is perfectly aligned with our design, so we're not going to have to move that around. And again, these will just move. Okay. So on the sides, these should line up perfectly, right? Oh, we'll need to grab that, without any of that. But up here, we're going to need to think about, and we'll change that color purple. Here, we're going to need to think about what these are actually lining up with. Should grab all those and move them up and over a bit. Just take by edge. No longer by edge. It's there. And this one actually would be better suited over there, which is fine because these are all on a flat, so we can actually just move these over a bit. That's going to change how the curvature happens a little bit in Turbo Smooth, but we won't worry about that today. As I mentioned before, this is intended for beginners, not for the advanced guys, so not a problem. These two can just be moved over along that edge and rotated along that edge. How's that going to work? That is going to work by this going over here. And that, hey, I thought I told you not by edge. I probably turned it back on, wasn't even paying attention. Okay, so the only thing now that we really need to fix is that corner right there. Right, we really want that and that to be welded together. Just about there. And that should be just about there. And really, you want these vertices to be kind of overlapping where the vertex on the next shape is going to be, so that when it comes time to weld them together, they're already in the same spot. Oh, we're missing an edge up in here. So we're going to need to make a cut from, you know what, let's just go from there to there. Are you going to be nice and do that for me? No, you're not. Okay. Grab our cut tool. How about from there? Here, you seem to understand it. From there to there to there. Hey, I can be really dumb sometimes. What is so hard about cutting from there to there? It doesn't make any sense. And ends up making you do all kinds of crazy movements just to be able to say cut from there to there. Hey, stupid. Sorry, 3ds Max is dumb. Okay, let's go from over here to there to there to there to there. Oh, okay. We'll grab that and connect. Sometimes you really have to do it yourself. Okay, so now that's all lined up, so we can get rid of that piece. Oh, see, we dragged out, extruded out a couple of edges over here, so you see they're no longer on the same smoothing group as as the rest of the tire wall. So we can just do an edge select like that, all the way down, and that all should be smoothing group 1. Here we go. Oh, all these as well. You know what? Since we're doing things the way that we are, let's just grab, you know what? The whole element, let's just get rid of all the smoothing groups. This is not a course about smoothing groups. That can be a whole other thing. Because when we turn on our Turbo Smooth, it's not going to care about smoothing groups. It's just going to put it all together. But we are now ready to make our repetition. So turn on some transparency, and we're going to make a copy. Now here you really want to be accurate because they're all going to be the same distance. So I'm going to start off with, let's say, 40 repetitions as copies because we're going to need to attach these together. And so there's a whole mess of them there. We can just grab all these, hide unselected, and that's going to help it make it that much easier to attach them together. So we come down here and we can attach by list, right? Just like with options, we'll attach with options. Select one, Control A to select all, and by default, it's already not showing all the lights, the previous tire that I did. Anything that's hidden, anything that's frozen is not going to show up on that list by default. You can say up here, show display containers, display frozen, display hidden object. And that way you can attach things that are not showing. Click OK, and now we've got one object that is all of this. What we're going to do is select by border, select all, right? So we're just click and drag around everything that's there. So we've got all of the borders. Hold Control and click Vertex, and that's converted our border selection into a vertex selection. So now we've got all of the vertices along the outer border of all of these individual shapes. And we should be able to just right click, weld with options, and take a close look at this because some things might weld together, some things might not. So you might just want to play around with this value a little bit. Right, if I turn this all the way down, you can see it's coming apart, and especially over here at the side. Right, you're seeing double lines quite definitively. So if I just move that up just a little bit, those start welding together, but these aren't welded together. So let's go up just a little bit more. There. Okay, so that seems to have welded nicely. Yeah. Okay, so that should be good. With our turbo smooth on, everything is looking snazzy. So we're just going to step back down because we're going to bend before the turbo smooth. So click on this drop down. Let's go ahead and add a bend modifier. So this bend modifier, of course, is going to bend something, but you need a lot of polys or a fair amount of polys for it to bend because if it's only one square shape, right, if it's only one poly, it can't fold in half just because you said bend, right? It's going to bend along each one of the edges along that shape. So you do need to have a certain amount of detail. So I'm going to pump up the angle just a little bit just to start it bending, and that way I can see what direction it's bending as I go to these different settings. All right, so I know I want Y, even though it's bending off like that. That's because the direction is pointing in the wrong direction, but it's on the right axis. So it's probably going to be 90 or negative 90. It is bending down on itself, so no surprise that it's negative 90. Sorry, yes, negative 90, and crank up the angle. That's going to come right around. Now, if you go just perfectly to where it comes together, in some cases you may get a little bit of a point at the top. Depends on how many facets, how many faces make that circle, and how much there is available to hide it. But you can see the orange box is overlapping on itself. That's kind of a good sign to say it is going to curl in and not curl to a point. And so you get it so that that edge is again almost gone. 372 degrees. So we can do 371. 371.5, 371.55. That's pretty damn good. On top of this, instead of collapsing down, it's good to be able to step back down through your settings. So I'm going to add an edit poly on top of it. I'm again going to grab these borders, but now it's only those, sorry, at each end of the bend coming together that need to be welded together. So again, switch to vertex selection, right click, weld with options, and again, make sure you're not losing anything along the way, because if it's too high, it's going to start welding potentially things that you don't want welded together, but that looks to be okay. And I'll turn the turbo smooth back on, and there you have it. So if you've been following along, you have got yourself a tire. I'm even going to add a little material here. I'm so sorry about this coughing. I'm going to call it quits after this, and I will show you the rim on another day. But there you go. So you see there's a nice little underinflated tire that can be used in rendering. You can put this into a film. You can put this into an animation. In a video game, this might be a little high. So for a video game, you'd probably want to take this and bake it down into a normal map. I might be getting ahead of you on a number of terms there, but a normal map, basically, if you've ever seen a texture map that is kind of purple and pink, basically what it's doing, right, like here, here's a normal map of a hex grid. So that hex grid, you can kind of tell by looking at it already that the blue square, pentagon in the middle is going to be kind of raised up a little bit, and then each of these sides is beveled away from that top surface. You can put this onto a perfectly flat surface, and that perfectly flat surface will look as though it's got all this bump information and all these fine details in it. And that's how we get away with it in video games, having characters that look as though they're made of millions and millions of polys, and you can see the stitching on their shirt, and you can make out every little, clasp of a zipper that runs down the front. That detail is not actually there for in-game models. It's simply the normal map that is faking that information. And I would do that for this tire as well, right? I would make like just the first poly modeling that we did, where it's just a couple of faces. I would take that, bend it around, weld that together, and that would be everything of the game model of that tire. That that would be enough. And then I would use this and say use this geometry to create this kind of a normal map to put onto my crazy low poly that's only made up of, 50 polygons, but it looks as though it's got all this detail. One last thing before I let you go, I want to show you how to wrap lettering around this, which is actually very easy and very quick. So coming over here into the Create tab, you come over to Splines, and there is text right here. So if you just click, it drops max text down, and that text is right here. So I'm going to say, good dog, whoops, tires. Sorry, my nose is running too. This is getting better and better, huh? So we've got our size, so we're just going to bring this down in size, even a little bit smaller maybe. We can make the kerneling a little bit wider. Let's rotate this over, so 90 degrees this way, 90 degrees up. Come over to our Modify tab, expand Rendering, and enable in Viewport so that we can see it. So here you can decide, we'll make this a little bit thinner. So if you choose Radial, then it's basically a cylinder that's being wrapped around that spline. And as you get into curves, it's going to add geometry dynamically. Right? So if you look at the D, you can see it's quite a bit of detail, but then this flat part gets no detail at all. It's dynamically changing depending on the spline settings. You can also say rectangular, so that really makes box lettering. But for this case, we're going to use radial. Maybe make it just a little bit thicker, just like that. We're going to bring this back so that it's just about with our tire. Just about there. Lined up with about the center here. Just about like that. So on top of this, we're going to add an edit poly so that it's editable. We're going to add one more modifier, which is a quadrify mesh. So you can see what this is doing. It's adding all these, it's triangulating more than quadrifying, but we can say change this to like 0.5. You see now it's adding all kinds of extra geometry here, which is really good for us because we need this to bend in multiple directions. And if it was that one long edge like we had before along this D, it would not bend along the surface of the tire. So now that we have that, here we can even collapse to that so that we were just back down to the editable poly. And we're going to start playing with our bends. So bend, increase that angle, check the direction. No, and I'm sure it's not going to be, oh, actually it is Y. So looking from the side, we basically want it to be curved like this. We want it to curve around the curvature of the tire. So that's probably going to be what a what am I doing? Okay, so 90 degrees is forward. So again, we're going to go -90 to bend it back. But it's bending along from the bottom, right? Like a tree would bend, right? It's like you're bending by grabbing the top and starting to pull it over. But really, I want to bend it from the top and the bottom at the same time while leaving the front. So I'm going to click on the plus beside bend, grab the center, and pull it up. There we go. And we can actually bend that a little bit more even. And if we don't want to move the center. We want to move the whole object now. And basically get that O so that it's right along the surface. It's good enough there. So right on top of this bend, we're going to add another bend. And we're going to want to bend this down. So that's and it degrees down and more and more and more until this. And with the edges on, you can basically follow one edge. So this definitely needs a little bit more, a little bit more, maybe a touch more. And that should do it. So we'll just press M to get our material. We'll put that material onto the text. And so now, where did we go? Let's click on home. So now we have a tire with text on the front, nice tread there, all nice and high poly, and something to start building a car, right? So maybe you can build a car out next and combine the poly modeling and the chop modeling and the box modeling all together and make yourself a car. Uh, I'm not a crazy car person, so I don't tend to model a lot of cars, but might be doing some vehicles and weapons and stuff later on. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions or if you wanted me to take a deeper look into some tool that I use, then please mention it in the comments below. I'd be happy to help. If there's anything else you'd like to see, or anything that you'd like to see on the next exercise, a particular thing you'd like to learn how to model, or that you need some tips on, I'd be happy to see what I can do to help you out and maybe take that on as the next course. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Don't stop modeling.